Chapter 2732, True Beginning. Chapter 2732, True Beginning. We won. We really won. Mushin and the other Frost Heaven members were ecstatic when they saw their guild's score. Many members even screamed in joy as they reveled in this moment of victory. What a close one. Shifeng couldn't help a sigh of relief. In the end, Frost Heaven had beaten Miracle by only 30 points, which was just 1 hour's worth of points for an advanced resource node. If not for some of the other guilds giving up on competing for Frost Heaven's resource nodes, Miracle might have won the 6th seat instead. Shifeng had to admit that Miracle's foundations were much stronger than many super guilds. Fortunately, everything went according to plan. Now that Frost Heaven has secured the 6th seat, we won't have to worry about getting slots to enter the upper zone. We'll also gain the privilege of garrisoning a city in a kingdom. When Shifeng saw the guilds listed on the screen being reorganized based on their points and Frost Heaven officially ranking 6th, he began considering the next step of his plans. In his previous life, the arrival of the first major update had brought about a complete change in God's Domain's power structure. Because of the NPC Forces addition, the superpowers competitors were no longer limited to just the major powers. The NPC Forces also became huge competitors. These NPC Forces were no ordinary organizations. Before God's Domain underwent its first major update, the NPC population in God's Domain had been minuscule. However, after the major update, the NPC population would increase crazily. Along with the increase in NPC population, the NPC forces normally only mentioned in books or conversations between NPCs would make their debut in the game. In fact, in a few more days, the various major powers would discover a frightening matter. Despite how massive God's Domain's player population was, players made up only a small minority of God's Domain's inhabitants. Yes. Despite the game's current player population being over 10 billion, players were only a minority in the world of God's Domain. B in the future, any random kingdom would easily have over 2 billion NPCs. The current player population could, at best, match the total NPC population in 5 or 6 kingdoms, which was roughly equivalent to the standard of one empire. However, God's Domain's players were scattered across the various kingdoms and empires on the 2 main continents. There were also a large number of players in the many other worlds. Hence, in the future, the native powers would become the strongest forces in the various kingdoms and empires. Moreover, after this major update, a severe problem would pop up: the disappearance of the protection mechanism for players. At this point, most players weren't even aware of this protection mechanism's existence. This was because this so-called protection mechanism only prevented NPCs from actively targeting players. Hence, most players wouldn't notice its existence and true purpose. They merely took its benefits for granted. However, all of this would change in the world of God's Domain in the future. So long as players left the city, they would no longer enjoy this protection mechanism. What did this mean? Ordinary players would most likely have a difficult time imagining the consequences of such a change. However, this would be a disaster for the growing guilds of God's Domain. This was because NPCs would become capable of taking the initiative to attack players. Highway robbery, launching ambushes when players were killing monsters, killing players because of a random mood swing, such incidents would become normal occurrences in the future. In fact, Shifeng himself had been robbed by Tier 4 NPCs on numerous occasions in his previous life. Of course, powerful NPCs wouldn't rob just anyone they saw. They would focus on stealing incredibly valuable items. Ordinary items would hardly arouse the interest of these powerful NPCs. This change in the game was highly unfavorable for Shifeng. After all, he carried too many valuable items. As he had the game's rules protecting him before, he hadn't worried about NPCs attacking him. Now that the rules had changed, he had no choice but to act carefully. However, this still wasn't the critical point of the major update. Instead, the fatal change caused by this update was in the management of guild towns and cities. During the early phases of the major update, most players still hadn't noticed a problem with the NPC forces. However, once the local NPC forces finished conducting a thorough investigation on players, they would begin attacking guild towns. If a guild town lacked sufficient combatants to defend it, the territory might very well end up getting taken. This was also one of the main reasons why many superpowers had disbanded after God's domain underwent its first major update in the past. Meanwhile, the situation now was even worse than during Shifeng's previous life. In the past, when the first major update hit, the various superpowers already had Tier 4 players defending its territories. However, in this life, let alone Tier 4 players, the superpowers didn't even have many Tier 3 players under their command. It would become a nightmare for the superpowers to defend their guild towns against the various NPC forces. At this point, Shifeng could already foresee many powers crumbling due to these changes. Compared to his previous life, the first major update's aftermath in this life would definitely be a much more painful sight. Once we get the guild privileges, we'll be able to garrison an NPC city and apply for a guild town teleportation permit. Then, Zero Wing could instantly become a giant in God's domain during the poaching wars. When Shifeng thought about the imminent poaching wars, he couldn't help feeling a little excited. In the past, some first-rate guilds had eventually grown into super guilds precisely because they managed to take advantage of the poaching wars. In the early stages of God's domain, the superpowers had a massive advantage in numbers over the major powers. By the time players had reached level 100, the major powers had mostly divided the available player population among themselves already. Hence, even some of the stronger guilds among the major powers had found it incredibly difficult to grow further. This was because after the average level of players reached level 100, guilds that wished to grow needed sufficient numbers. This was especially true when it came to Tier 3 players. Without sufficient Tier 3 players, effectively defending guild towns against NPC forces and monster armies would become impossible. Meanwhile, most players mainly looked at the number of guild towns a guild possessed and the prosperity of these towns when determining a guild's strength. This was also why the War God's Temple had set the number of guild towns owned as a participation requirement for the reserve seat competition. And if a guild wished to maintain many guild towns simultaneously, a lot of manpower was necessary. Now, although Zero Wing already possessed more members than most first-rate guilds, it was still far from comparable to the various superpowers. Meanwhile, after the Great Collapse, the members of the fallen powers would become independent players. So long as Zero Wing took advantage of this opportunity, it could instantly become a bona fide superpower. Moreover, Shifeng was confident that once Zero Wing had a sufficient player base, the guild could go up against Starlink, Saint's Hand, and even the 5 great super guilds. At the very least, Zero Wing wouldn't be forced to hole up in just a handful of guild towns and cities in an incredibly passive state. In fact, with Zero Wing's current state, it was only a matter of time before the guild crumbled. After all, what allowed the various superpowers to triumph over others were the talents they cultivated. With the resources the superpowers provided, these talents would slowly grow into powerhouses in the virtual gaming industry over time. If Zero Wing did not make sufficient preparations, with the guild's current scale and talent count, the guild would be fortunate to keep itself alive in the future. Meanwhile, along with the release of the official rankings, the spectating players and major powers erupted in an uproar. Crap! Frost Heaven actually got a seat. Frost Heaven really is lucky. It actually found a dark horse like Zero Wing. With this, Frost Heaven really is going to rise to prominence. Zero Wing, is it? While the spectating players and major powers found Frost Heaven's victory surprising, they didn't feel particularly surprised by it, either. After all, the Tier 4 combatants Zero Wing possessed were simply too terrifying. They were not opponents Tier 3 players could hope to contend with. The major powers paid more attention to Zero Wing than to Frost Heaven. Frost Heaven can consider themselves lucky. After looking at the guild rankings, Cold Shadow glanced at Shifeng's information and sneered. However, Zero Wing won't be as lucky afterward. The nail that sticks out gets hammered. This held especially true for a prominent guild like Zero Wing. The various superpowers were greatly limited in the forces they could bring out during this competition. This was especially true for the 5 great super guilds. After all, Tier 3 was the minimum standard for players to participate in the competition. However, there was no such restriction in the outside world. The fact that Zero Wing had revealed 2 Tier 4 players in this competition had provoked the various superpowers' intense envy. Zero Wing was merely a pseudo-superpower, yet it had actually produced 2 Tier 4 players. If someone were to say that there wasn't a secret behind this achievement, nobody would believe them. After this competition, she could easily foresee that both ordinary powers and superpowers would hound Zero Wing until the guild gave up its secret to completing the Tier 4 promotion. Otherwise, only death would await Zero Wing. As the various superpowers began to plot against Zero Wing, Shifeng remained wholly unaware of the matter. After the War God's Temple announced the winners for the 6 reserve seats and awarded Zero Wing with a War God's Temple official guild certificate, Shifeng promptly disbanded his team and bid goodbye to Mushin. He did not stay behind to take part in Frost Heaven's celebration banquet but quietly left the Fire Dragon Empire instead. This caused 7 Wonders and Hong Xinyuan to lament the missed opportunity to thank Shifeng properly. Black Flame really is an unfathomable person. After watching Shifeng's figure disappear into the distance, 7 Wonders turned to Mushin and said earnestly, "Mushin, you'll be the first vice guild leader from now on. You'll be responsible for the matter regarding the upper zone slots, S-rank nutrient fluids, and subsequent affairs relating to our alliance with Zero Wing. I believe you can handle them well. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Guild Leader, please rest assured. I will definitely handle them well," Mushin answered ecstatically. Meanwhile, after Shifeng left the War God's Temple, he did not hurry to return to Zero Wing's residence to preside over the changing situation. Instead, he made his way to the Twin Towers Kingdom, a dilapidated country on the brink of destruction which would also become one of the most brilliant kingdoms in the future. Twin Towers City, City Hall. "Sir, how may I be of service?" a level 180, Tier 3 male administrator asked when he saw Shifeng enter the building. "If you wish to purchase land, I will have to apologize in advance. We are no longer selling land to the public." "No, I'm not here to purchase land," Shifeng said, shaking his head. He then took out the official guild certificate from the War God's Temple and said, "I am Zero Wing's guild leader. My guild wishes to officially garrison this city. May I know if that's possible?" Chapter 2733, Garrisoning Twin Towers. Chapter 2733, Garrisoning Twin Towers. Vico, the level 180, Tier 3 male administrator, looked at the certificate in Shifeng's hand and carefully inspected it. "Yes, this is indeed an official guild certificate from the War God's Temple." Vico nodded, his gaze turning respectful as he looked at Shifeng. He then added slowly, "Lord Guild Leader, there is nothing wrong with your guild certificate. However, I'm afraid that as an ordinary guild, your guild does not qualify to garrison our kingdom's capital. You can only choose to garrison another of the Twin Towers Kingdom cities." Sure enough, the guild still can't garrison the capital city. Shifeng was not particularly surprised by Vico's rejection. Since that's the case, Zero Wing will garrison Sky Spring City. Although the War God's Temple now recognized Zero Wing as an official guild in God's domain, that was only recognition and nothing more. Initially, Shifeng thought that with the deterioration of the Twin Towers Kingdom due to the abyssal monsters, Zero Wing might have a chance to garrison its capital. However, it would seem that he had still underestimated the Twin Towers Kingdom. After thinking it through, though, he found this situation reasonable. In his previous life, the Twin Towers Kingdom had shone brightly on the continent of God's domain, thanks to the Tower of Time and secret Covenant Tower it housed. It had been a kingdom that stood far above other kingdoms. Moreover, while the Twin Towers Kingdom might currently look battered, now that the first major update had taken place, NPCs would start appearing in large numbers across the kingdom. Once that happened, it was only a matter of time before the NPCs turned the tables on the abyssal monsters. Otherwise, Shifeng wouldn't have rushed to have Zero Wing garrison the Twin Towers Kingdom. "That won't be a problem. Please follow me. I will conduct the procedures for you," Vico said and led Shifeng to the third-floor hall. On his way to the third floor, Shifeng noticed that the number of NPCs inside the city hall had increased significantly. Previously, it was rare to see even one Tier 3 NPC in a city hall. Now, he spotted at least a dozen. Moreover, even the weakest of them was at level 140, while the strongest reached level 182. They were not existences current Tier 3 players could hope to contend against. Through this, he could already anticipate a large batch of Tier 3 NPCs appearing inside the Twin Towers Kingdom in the near future. With the combat power of these NPCs, retaking the Twin Towers Kingdom and driving the abyssal monsters back into the abyss would be entirely possible. Meanwhile, the Sky Spring City he chose to have zero-wing garrison was the closest NPC city to the Secret Covenant Tower. Although Sky Spring City didn't even rank within the top 15 of the Twin Towers Kingdom's NPC cities, after the first major update, the Secret Covenant Tower would become more attractive than the Tower of Time. This was because the Secret Covenant Tower was a holy land for grinding for levels and acquiring guild resources. Before God's Domain's first major update took place, grinding for levels was a daily chore for players. However, after the first major update, grinding for levels would become deadly. If players did not possess overwhelming strength, then the moment they left the confines of NPC cities, they would have to fight with their lives on the line. This was because both NPCs and monsters gained conscious thought after the major update, and they would no longer let players kill them like idiots. Both NPCs and monsters would fight desperately for survival. Hence, grinding monsters would no longer be simple, repetitive fights for EXP. Instead, it would become a fight where players bet their lives for EXP. In a situation where the two sides were roughly equal in strength, every fight would be incredibly taxing. In fact, after the major update, most players would no longer dare fight monsters that were significantly higher leveled than they were. Of course, the increased difficulty in killing monsters came in tandem with a drastic increase in the EXP monsters awarded, at least 10 times more than what they previously awarded. Even so, leveling up would still become an increasingly laborious task in the future. However, it was a different story in the Secret Covenant Tower. The countless monsters trapped in the Secret Covenant Tower's special space had already gone crazy and did not possess any consciousness or intelligence. The only thing on their minds was slaughter. Yet, despite the lack of intelligence, the monsters inside granted the same amount of EXP as the monsters in the outside world. The only problem was that entering the Secret Covenant Tower cost magic crystals. In addition, the monsters inside did not drop coins or magic crystals. The value of the materials they dropped was also negligible. Fortunately, the Secret Covenant Tower wasn't completely barren of loot. Hidden inside the special space were relics belonging to ancient civilizations. The deeper one progressed down the tower, the better the relics one could obtain. Examples would be weapon and equipment designs, master-ranked potion recipes, and even complete legacies for Tier 3 classes. Yes, complete legacies for Tier 3 classes. Unlike the Tier 3 legacies scattered in the outside world, a complete legacy could lower the difficulty of players' Tier 3 promotion by a large margin. A complete Tier 3 legacy could allow a guild to gain a large number of Tier 3 players within a short period. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that, for guilds, a complete Tier 3 legacy was 100 times more valuable than a fragmented legendary item. Meanwhile, complete Tier 3 legacies only started appearing from the 18th floor. This was a place that became available after the first major update. Before this, the Secret Covenant Tower was only a place for pre-level 100 players to grind for levels. It wasn't suitable for players past level 100. However, after the first major update, the Secret Covenant Tower would no longer be the same as before. In the past, after it was revealed that the Secret Covenant Tower dropped complete Tier 3 legacies, the various powers on the Eastern continent had swarmed to the Twin Towers Kingdom. This, in turn, had made the Twin Towers Kingdom one of the most dazzling kingdoms in God's Domain, and Sky Spring City had also become an NPC main city that was second only to the capital city. Shortly afterward, Administrator Vico completed all the formalities needed for Zero Wing to garrison Sky Spring City. Lord Guild Leader, this is your Sky Spring City Guild token. Vico handed a golden token to Shifeng. He then explained, this token grants you partial authority to manage Sky Spring City, including its security and development. Once Zero Wing garrisons Sky Spring City, it will receive 10% of the city's profits as maintenance and management fees. No problem. Zero Wing will manage Sky Spring City well and turn it into the best city in the Twin Towers Kingdom, Shifeng said, nodding. Once a guild garrisoned a city, it couldn't arbitrarily decide to abandon the city and seek greener pastures. One could say that the guild and city were bound together for good or ill. Thus, even after guilds obtained the qualifications to garrison an NPC city, they still had to be careful with their choice. Fortunately, Shifeng didn't have to concern himself with such a problem. Sky Spring City was bound to become one of the important hubs in the eastern continent. The money and resources it could rake in would far surpass those of many royal capitals. If developed properly, the city could even rival imperial capitals. "I pray that you can fulfill this wonderful goal, my lord," Vico said, feeling slightly surprised by Shifeng's confidence. "Now that Zero Wing has officially garrisoned Sky Spring City, can we enable Sky Spring City's city teleportation network?" Shifeng asked. Obtaining the resources Sky Spring City had to offer was only one of his goals in having Zero Wing garrison the city. What was more important for Zero Wing was the city teleportation network that came with garrisoning a city. This was also the main reason the various superpowers had frantically fought to secure a reserve seat. "Certainly. However, your guild will have to handle the cost of binding with Sky Spring City's teleportation magic array," Vico said with a hint of joy in his voice. "How much will it cost to construct one large-scale teleportation array?" Shifeng asked. "If it is only one, the material fee is 100,000 gold coins and 30,000 magic crystals. The labor cost is an additional 5,000 gold, Vico said. In total, it will cost 105,000 gold and 30,000 magic crystals. You guys sure are ruthless. It's just a bunch of ordinary materials, yet you're actually charging me 100,000 gold. Shifeng was flabbergasted at Vico's quote. If it were before, he might have accepted this price as normal. However, after gaining experience in constructing teleportation arrays, he knew that the materials needed were much cheaper than what Vico quoted him. At most, the material cost should total around several thousand gold. No. The materials the Twin Towers Kingdom uses are the best. No problems will occur even after 1,000 years of use, Vico assured sincerely while shaking his head. Fine, so be it. However, I want everything done within 2 hours, Shifeng said after taking a look at the time. It had been nearly a day since the first major update took place. Meanwhile, the first wave of the NPC population boom would occur on the second day after the first major update. This was also the moment darkness would befall the various powers. That won't be a problem, Vico said confidently. May I know which guild city you wish to construct the teleportation array in? Silverwing City, Shifeng answered after giving the question some thought. Silverwing City was pivotal to Zero Wing's future development and resistance against Saint's Hand. Hence, it was imperative that Silverwing City developed as rapidly as possible. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Although it is slightly far, so long as my lord makes the full payment, we will act immediately, Vico said, gritting his teeth as he looked at the map. To Vico's joy, Shifeng paid the 105,000 gold and 30,000 magic crystals without hesitation. After receiving the coins and magic crystals, the NPC promptly left the private lounge, evidently making his way to Silverwing City. Next, I'll have to see how much the NPC population will increase during the initial wave. Shifeng's gaze grew solemn after Vico left the room. Hopefully, the number isn't too significant. Although he had managed to execute his plan in time, its success still depended heavily on how much the NPC population grew after the first population boom. If the increase in NPC count was too severe, even Zero Wing would be overwhelmed. After all, the guild simply had too few Tier 3 combatants right now. Meanwhile, Tier 3 combatants were the minimum requirement for maintaining public order in guild towns. At 6 a.m., the sun slowly rose into the sky and shone its dazzling rays onto the various cities of God's domain, symbolizing a new day in God's domain. Chapter 2734, New World Begins. Chapter 2734, New World Begins. Typhoon Empire, Typhoon City. The morning sun's rays shone on the secret pavilion's residence. However, nobody in the residence's scorching atmosphere was in the mood to enjoy this cool, morning sun. As the competition for the reserve seats had just ended, The many budding talents and matured powerhouses that had debuted during the competition were now a target of attention for the secret pavilion. To sort out the information of these people and sell the information in the next publication of the God's Domains experts list, the whole secret pavilion had become extremely busy. Every secret pavilion member within the Typhoon City residence was either sending out information to other branches or organizing the information they received from other branches. Everyone was so busy that they lost track of time. Uncle Yuan, the Strength 0 wing displayed this time is truly astonishing. One Tier 4 Sword Emperor and one suspected Tier 4 Great Wizard that wields Tier 4 large-scale destruction spells. 0 Wing has even become a guild officially recognized by the War God's Temple. The various superpowers will have to fear 0 Wing now, Purple Jade exclaimed as she read the report on 0 Wing in her hands. BOMB 0 Wing was a guild they had watched grow from nothing to its current state. Initially, 0 Wing had been a small guild that couldn't even be considered third-rate. However, it gradually grew into a large guild that could challenge even first-rate guilds. Afterward, it had fought against superpowers time after time. Now, it even stood on the international stage of God's Domain and aided Frost Heaven in securing the 6th reserve seat, shocking countless powers in God's Domain in one fell swoop. At this point, even the various superpowers had to acknowledge that 0 Wing was a guild to be wary of. The only thing 0 Wing lacked now was a sufficiently strong foundation. It just didn't have the frightening manpower and expansive territory of a superpower. While that's correct, you shouldn't forget that 0 Wing is a guild that is completely reliant on only a handful of individuals to support it. The guild is walking a tightrope, and a single mistake can lead to disaster. Now, it has even become the focus of God's Domain's various powers, Yuan Taishan said in a low tone, shaking his head. The Tier 4 promotion quest is simply too challenging. You should know this as well. Yet, 0 Wing has 2 people suspected to have completed their promotions. You should know very well what this implies. Uncle Yuan, you mean, 0 Wing has grasped a way to complete the Tier 4 promotion quest easily? Purple Jade was a little shocked. According to the Secret Pavilion's information gathering, the hardest part in completing the Tier 4 promotion quest was searching for one's Tier 4 legacy land. Even the Secret Pavilion had yet to locate a single Tier 4 legacy land. If 0 Wing really found a reliable way to locate Tier 4 legacy lands, this would be an incredibly frightening matter. This is only conjecture. We still don't have any evidence to back it up right now. Moreover, I think the possibility of this being true is low. After all is said and done, God's Domain is a relatively fair game. If Tier 4 legacy lands could be located easily, Tier 4 classes wouldn't be considered powerhouses in God's Domain, Yuan Taishan said, shaking his head. Even so, just the possibility holds an incredibly fatal attraction for the various powers. According to the inside information we've secured thus far, we can confirm that over a dozen superpowers are already preparing to suppress 0 Wing. In addition, 0 Wing has plenty of enemies, the War-Blood Adventurer team on Dragonheart Island, the Dark World's various powers in the Dark Knight Empire, and Saint's Hand in Starmoon Kingdom. Starlink, 0 Wing's old nemesis, has also been conducting a series of secretive operations recently. Starlink seems to be planning something big by the looks of it. If these superpowers join forces, even if 0 Wing has a Sword Emperor and a Great Wizard defending its territories, the guild will still have difficulty surviving. Purple Jade's complexion turned ugly at Yuan Taishan's analysis. A pseudo-superpower was actually fighting on 3 different fronts. Moreover, every one of its opponents was either a superpower or an organization backed by a superpower. Anyone that heard this would definitely feel despair. For 0 Wing to survive until now, this was simply a miracle. Of course, Shifeng and the rest of 0 Wing's upper echelon might not be afraid of the various superpowers as individuals, but it was a different story for a guild with so many members. It would be very easy for the various superpowers to attack such a guild. Meanwhile, if a guild lacked manpower, there were many things it couldn't accomplish. One such example was the collection of resources. Just this point alone would be sufficient to make Shifeng and the others crumble. What more operating guild towns and cities? This is just the situation on the eastern continent. 0 Wing isn't safe on the western continent, either. I heard that many of the Western continent's superpowers are showing interest in the Starlight Fortress, Yuan Taishan said, chuckling when he saw the blank expression on Purple Jade's face. You should know by now that Zero Wing has always been walking a tightrope, right? What happens next will depend on what kind of decision Black Flame makes. If Black Flame handles this properly and avoids disaster, with Zero Wing's current foundations, it is definitely possible for the guild to progress further. If it's mishandled, then Zero Wing will be eternally doomed. When Yuan Taishan stated his last sentence, his voice was filled with confidence. That was because, unlike most people, he knew that mythology was most likely the driving force behind the various superpowers' decision to act against Zero Wing this time. Mythology was a behemoth. It had an unfathomable foundation in both the virtual gaming world and the real world. It was an existence that even the current secret pavilion feared greatly. As Yuan Taishan and Purple Jade conversed, the sound of hurried footsteps suddenly came from outside the office door. The next moment, a level 114, Tier 3 ranger barged into the office, which made Yuan Taishan frown in obvious dissatisfaction with this Tier 3 ranger's panicky actions. What's the matter? Why are you in such a rush? Yuan Taishan questioned in a low tone. It's bad. Elder Yuan, something big happened, the Tier 3 ranger reported hurriedly as he wiped the sweat off his forehead. Just a while ago, our branches sent in news that a large number of NPCs have appeared on the streets of the various cities. So what if NPCs appeared? What's there to be surprised about? Yuan Taishan reacted nonchalantly. In God's domain, as a town or city developed, the number of NPC residents would increase. This was a normal occurrence. Moreover, players and NPCs practically lived in two completely different worlds. The interactions between the two sides were few and far between. But the numbers are far too massive, the Tier 3 ranger insisted anxiously. How many? Yuan Taishan asked, his curiosity piqued. Too many. I don't know how many appeared, either. Gulping, the Tier 3 ranger pointed at the nearby window and said, I think you should look for yourself, Elder Yuan. This matter has already caused an uproar among the players in the city. Uproar? Yuan Taishan couldn't help his puzzlement. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. However, he felt that the ranger before him shouldn't be lying. He immediately stood up and approached the window. When the view outside the French window entered his sight, Yuan Taishan froze on the spot in stupefaction. Uncle Yuan? Purple Jade grew puzzled as well when she saw Yuan Taishan standing stock-still. She then walked toward the window to take a look as well. NPCs thronged the main street outside the residence, talking and laughing in groups. Many were adventurers clad in exquisite equipment, even the lowest leveled among them was level 120, while the strongest one reached level 194. Moreover, these NPC adventurers were Tier 3 on average, with even the weakest one at Tier 2. Aside from these NPC adventurers, there was also a large number of NPC civilians on the street. Purple Jade even saw NPC children running around, playing with pebbles on the street, and even fighting each other with wooden swords. These NPCs accounted for over 80% of the people on the main street. Chapter 2735, Different God's Domain, Zero Wing's Decision. Chapter 2735, Different God's Domain, Zero Wing's Decision. Why are there so many NPCs? Purple Jade couldn't believe her eyes as she looked at the NPCs chatting merrily on the main street. Their current location was an island nation on the western continent, with an incredibly harsh environment. As a result, the player population here was insignificant, let alone the NPC population. If not for the increased trade between the two main continents, which attracted many powers and merchant players to the Typhoon Empire, the number of people walking on the main street wouldn't have exceeded 100. So, what was with this situation? With just a casual glance, she already spotted more than 1,000 NPCs, many of them NPC adventurers. Players were only a small group of unremarkable existences. After pondering for some time, Yuan Taishan turned around and asked the Tier 3 ranger, "Have you investigated the origins of these NPCs yet?" "We've investigated already. However, we don't know where these NPCs came from." The only thing we know is that these NPCs seem to have appeared directly inside the various NPC cities, the Tier 3 Ranger replied, shaking his head. Anxiously, he continued, the appearance of these NPCs has caused a sharp drop in the number of quests available in the Adventurers Association. The number of quests players can pick up is continuously decreasing. Moreover, what else is there? Yuan Taishin asked curiously. According to reports, many players have been killed after coming into conflict with NPCs outside the cities. However, this still isn't the most important part. In an uneasy tone, the ranger continued, now, many NPCs have also flooded into the various guild towns and cities, and some NPCs with bad behavior have caused a lot of incidents. Most importantly, according to our observations, various NPC forces are actually secretly investigating us. How is this possible? Purple Jade goggled in shock. She never thought that there would come a day where the NPCs who only knew how to give quests would secretly investigate them. She got goosebumps at the thought of this. It was as if the dolls they were playing with had suddenly gained life and began secretly observing their every action. At this time, the secret pavilion wasn't the only one shocked by the sudden influx of NPCs in the game. The various powers and players of God's domain were similarly horrified by this situation. What's going on? Why are so many NPCs competing with us for quests? That's nothing. I feel that these NPCs are looking at us players as if they are looking at aliens. Some bars in the city are actually refusing entry to players. You think that's surprising? Wait till you go out to the fields. Right now, the NPCs out in the fields far outnumber us players. Some of these NPCs are even stealing dungeons from us. For a time, independent players had heated discussions over the sudden changes in God's domain. Everyone felt as if they had truly arrived in a different world. Now, in addition to other players, they also had to compete with NPCs. Moreover, these NPCs were even more difficult to deal with than players. Not only were these NPCs powerful, but they also had an overwhelming advantage in numbers over players. The only advantage players had was their inability to die a permanent death. However, as if understanding this point, the NPCs generally didn't forge irreconcilable feuds with players. Most of them would only teach the players that offended them a lesson. Only the Dark Forces NPCs disregarded this matter. Compared to the independent players, though, the various powers were the ones that had a truly big headache. Damn it! Why did all these NPCs come from? Instead of staying in NPC cities, they actually came to make trouble in our guild towns and cities. Many of our businesses can't even operate normally, thanks to them. That's not all. Some NPCs are even robbing our mines and transportation teams. Along with the sudden influx of NPCs, the various powers suddenly found that the difficulty of maintaining the security of guild towns and cities and completing large-scale transportation quests had increased drastically. Some superpowers had even tasted getting bullied for the first time since entering God's domain. However, the current players were simply no match for these NPC forces. Even the superpowers had no choice but to abandon many of their development plans and focus on protecting their territories. As for the major powers, they even began abandoning some of their guild towns to concentrate their forces on defending their crucial territories. For a time, the various player forces in God's domain shrank rapidly. Simultaneously, they also began recruiting members desperately to defend against the NPC forces' assault. Silverwing City, Zero Wing's residents. Due to the sudden increase in the game's NPC population and the many incidents subsequent to this change, Zero Wing's upper echelon had gathered to discuss how to deal with these NPCs. Guild leader, the major powers are frantically recruiting members to consolidate their power. They are also spending a lot of money to hire Tier 3 NPCs from the Adventurers Association to guard their guild towns. If we don't act now, I'm afraid the more powerful Tier 3 NPCs will be snatched up by others, Liang Jing said anxiously to Shifeng after reading the latest report. The sudden influx of NPCs had caught every player off guard. Originally, the changes to the NPCs after the first major update was already a slight problem. Now that the NPC population far surpassed the player population, this change was no longer just a problem but a disaster. Zero Wing's 3 guild cities held strategic locations and also had incredible growth potential. Meanwhile, according to the information Liang Jing's subordinates sent her, many NPC forces had already set their sights on Zero Wing's guild cities. These NPC forces refrained from taking action only because they were still investigating Zero Wing's strength. However, once they completed their investigation, they would most likely take action immediately. If an NPC force took action, it could create much more trouble than a player force. While the possibility of a frontal confrontation was low, it wasn't exactly impossible. And even if the various NPC forces did not directly assault Zero Wing's guild cities, they could still dispatch NPCs to lurk around the guild cities' trade routes and ambush susceptible targets. That would be a nightmare for Zero Wing. Hence, Zero Wing had to increase its defenses as soon as possible. That's right. Guild leader, if we act slowly, the various major powers will steal all of the powerful Tier 3 NPCs. The other management personnel present nodded in agreement with Liang Jing. In the current situation, even the various superpowers had to lower their heads and hire NPCs from the Adventurers Association. If Zero Wing didn't act now, it would soon be too late. After all, there was a limited number of Tier 3 NPCs available for hire at the Adventurers Association. If the other powers got to pick first, nothing would be left for Zero Wing. Although Zero Wing also had many powerful Tier 3 personal guards, these personal guards were still far from enough to maintain the security of 3 cities. Moreover, the difficulty of directly recruiting Tier 3 personal guards was incredibly high. At best, players could only recruit Tier 2 NPCs with good growth potential. In addition, personal guards cost a lot of money to nurture. On the off chance these personal guards died in combat, Zero Wing would suffer a major blow. However, the Adventurers Association's NPCs wouldn't pose such a problem. Even if these NPCs died, it was none of Zero Wing's concern. The guild wasn't obligated to pay a huge price to resurrect these NPCs. That won't be necessary. Shifeng shook his head. While hiring the Adventurers Association's Tier 3 NPCs is indeed a solution, it isn't a long-term one. The cost to hire these NPCs is excessive. Any random Tier 3 NPC will cost at least 100 gold per day to hire, and the defense of a small city will require at least 500 Tier 3 NPCs. That's an expenditure of 50,000 gold per day. Only the superpowers could afford to pay a daily maintenance fee of 50,000 gold for one guild city. However, it was a different story for Zero Wing. Zero Wing originally already spent a lot of coins every day. In fact, the guild was reliant on selling coins for credits to maintain the operation of its headquarters in the real world. Hence, it couldn't afford to hire Tier 3 NPCs to safeguard its guild cities at all. But quite a number of NPCs have begun making a ruckus in our cities. Fortunately, we have Tier 4 NPCs defending our cities, so those NPC forces are still cautious when causing a scene. However, if those NPC forces take action against us outside our cities, we'll have a difficult time managing the situation, Yulan said worriedly. Previously, as their opponents were only players, they could still deal with the situation. However, now that their opponents were Tier 3 NPCs that ranged between level 130 and level 160, Zero Wing was in an incredibly unfavorable situation. Of Zero Wing's combatants, the only ones capable of fighting the hostile NPCs were the guild's personal guards. However, these personal guards were necessary for maintaining order in the guild cities. Let's just stop caring, then, Shifeng said, chuckling. Yulan was stunned by Shifeng's response. Stop caring? At this moment, let alone Yulan, the other Zero Wing executives present were also stunned. What did Shifeng mean by that? If they stopped caring about this situation, how would the 3 guild cities generate income? If the guild cities lost their trade routes, the items sold by NPCs would disappear from the cities. If that happened, the cities would lose a significant portion of their attraction for players. Moreover, the taxes collected from NPC merchants made up a large portion of the guild city's income. From today onward, Zero Wing's 3 guild cities will prohibit entry to unrelated NPCs. As for NPC merchants, we'll set an exception for them. However, each shop is allowed to bring only 10 people into the cities, Shifeng said calmly. In addition, raise the entrance fees in all 3 cities to 20 silver coins and double the rent for the shops. However, partnered powers may receive a 20% discount. Guild leader. Everyone present in the meeting room gaped in shock at Shifeng's words. They could indeed prevent NPCs from making a ruckus in the 3 guild cities by prohibiting entry to the majority of NPCs. However, the development of the 3 cities would also stagnate. After all, players had to get their quests from these NPCs. Moreover, many of the items sold in the 3 cities were actually sold by NPCs. If they refused entry to NPCs, it would be equivalent to halving the income of the 3 cities. As for raising entrance fees to 20 silver and doubling shop rent, that was basically saying Zero Wing wanted no players inside its guild cities. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Zero Wing would be digging its own grave if it instituted these measures. Just get it done. I have my reasons, Shifeng said, not bothering to provide any additional explanations. He then left the meeting room immediately. When the first major update took place in his previous life, the various powers already had plenty of Tier 3 players under their command, with some even having Tier 4 players. However, at present, not only was the NPC population boom much bigger than in the past, but the various powers also barely had any Tier 3 experts under their command. Hence, the damage the various powers would suffer in the ensuing chaos would definitely be much worse than in the past. While Zero Wing indeed possessed great strength and even commanded Tier 4 NPCs, it was still impossible to maintain the 3 guild cities' security with their current manpower. The only solution Zero Wing had now was to take decisive action and thoroughly prohibit NPCs from entering its guild cities. Afterward, he would have Zero Wing's members enter the Secret Covenant Tower in full force to raise their levels and strength. Otherwise, once the NPC population increased even further and the NPC forces began their assault, Zero Wing would be in a ton of trouble. Soon afterward, Zero Wing's 3 guild cities announced Shifeng's decision to the outside world. All 3 cities immediately went into an uproar. Chapter 2736. Crazy Zero Wing? Cold Spring Forest, Stone Forest City, Freedom Hotel. Chapter 2736. Crazy Zero Wing? Cold Spring Forest, Stone Forest City, Freedom Hotel. What is Zero Wing thinking? Mu Lingshaw, who was resting in a room in the Freedom Hotel, stood up reflexively in surprise when she saw the announcement Zero Wing made in Stone Forest City. Prohibiting NPCs from entering the city at such a time? Even Stone Forest City wouldn't be able to afford such a loss. After reading the city announcement, Unyielding Heart, who sat nearby, pondered before saying, but this is indeed one way to solve the NPC problem. But at the cost of more than half of the city's revenue? Isn't this too huge a price to pay? Moreover, Zero Wing directly raised the city's entrance fee to 20 silver to make up for the loss. I'm afraid ordinary players won't be able to accept such a fee. Even the present Stone Forest City would have a hard time justifying it, let alone Zero Wing's 2 other guild cities, Mu Lingshaw said in confusion. The Dark World side is keeping an eye on us. If we show any signs of weaknesses, the Dark World's powers will make a move. I don't know the exact reason for Zero Wing's decision, but this is undoubtedly good news for our guild, Unyielding Heart said, smiling. Good news. A blank look appeared on Mu Lingshaw's face. She couldn't understand how this situation was beneficial to Unyielding Soul in any way. The increase in Stone Forest City's entrance fee will undoubtedly drive away many players. Meanwhile, you know how excellent Stone Forest City's environment is. It is the best place among the level 100+ neutral maps for players to get rid of the foreign energy invading their bodies. There is also nothing currently available that can compete with the Freedom Hotel, Unyielding Heart explained. If players start leaving Stone Forest City, empty slots will appear in the Freedom Hotel. We can have our guild members fill these slots. You're right. Mu Lingshaw's eyes glowed in realization. I'll notify the guild leader and have him make the necessary preparations. Even before the first major update, Stone Forest City was incredibly crowded already. Meanwhile, the sudden influx of NPCs had only made the city even more crowded. The city's population had grown so much that the city's management had no choice but to limit traffic into the city. If many NPCs and players left Stone Forest City, it would indeed be a perfect opportunity for Unyielding Soul to develop there. Stone Forest City was one of the few player-owned intermediate cities in God's domain. If Unyielding Soul leveraged this opportunity, its guild members' average level might surpass that of other guilds. Orc Empire, Silverwing City. This is crazy. Zero Wing must be crazy. It doesn't matter if those NPCs are driven away, but why did the rent become more expensive too? This must be Zero Wing's conspiracy. Zero Wing must be trying to drive merchant players like us out of Silverwing City. Zero Wing is awesome. I support Zero Wing. Good riddance to those NPCs. This is a city built by players. I can't even pick up a quest, thanks to all those NPCs. The players residing in Silverwing City had mixed opinions regarding Zero Wing's new regulations. Some criticized Zero Wing for being money crazy, while others approved of the decision. Meanwhile, when the various major powers received word of Zero Wing's decision to prohibit NPCs from entering its cities, they were amused. How bold of Zero Wing! I want to see how it's going to continue operating its 3 guild cities. While everyone else is frantically recruiting members and thinking about how to keep themselves alive, Zero Wing is chasing people away. It seems Zero Wing has grown arrogant after helping Frost Heaven become one of the 12 reserve guild. Now that Silverwing City has taken the initiative to step back in the Orc Empire, it's a good opportunity for our guild to grow. Relay my orders immediately. We'll halve our guild town's entrance fee. We'll also lower the membership requirements for our guild. When the various major powers saw Zero Wing driving players away from its cities, they promptly took advantage of this opportunity to increase their market share in the Orc Empire. In less than half an hour, the number of players entering Zero Wing's 3 guild cities decreased significantly. Many ordinary players operating in the Orc Empire opted to visit other guild towns instead. The income Zero Wing generated from NPCs also fell sharply. Guild leader, this really won't do. In less than half an hour, our 3 cities have lost more than 20% of their traffic. At this rate, we would be fortunate to retain even 10% of our usual traffic, Yulan said after urgently contacting Shifeng. She felt herself going crazy over this situation. All of this was money, as Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose currently weren't in a suitable state to manage Zero Wing. The guild's management was left to Yulan and Liang Jing. Previously, they still weren't aware of Zero Wing's exact situation. However, after shouldering the 2 vice guild leaders' responsibilities, they discovered that Zero Wing had always been walking a tightrope. Now, the guild's financial situation was just barely balanced. However, if Zero Wing were to lose most of its 3 cities' income, the guild would most likely lose the ability to operate normally. After all, the training system in the real world required a lot of energy to operate. Moreover, the guild had increased its internal member count to 5,000. Thus, the amount of money the guild spent every day was staggering. To make matters worse, Zero Wing did not accept the investment of major corporations. If the guild lost its income of coins now, it wouldn't take more than a week for the guild to go bankrupt. I understand. Shifeng nodded and chuckled when he saw Yolan's anxious expression. But this is only spare change. Spare change? Yulan felt as if she was going to faint. They were losing hundreds of thousands of gold coins per day. Moreover, the various large guilds operating in the Orc Empire hadn't been slacking in developing their respective guild towns. Although none of them had created a basic city yet, they did have advanced towns. In addition, these guilds received a lot of funds from their investors. Hence, the facilities their towns had weren't that far from matching Silverwing cities. The main difference was that the security and convenience level in these towns were far from comparable to Silverwing cities. Shifting his camera angle, Shifeng smiled and asked, "Can you tell what this building in front of me is?" The next moment, what appeared on Yolan's screen was a massive, 5-story tall building. High walls surrounded this building, thoroughly isolating it from the outside world. The density of the mana within the walls was also considerably higher than that of the outside world. Moreover, the building looked the same as the teleportation halls found in NPC cities. A teleportation hall? Yulan gasped. That's right. A teleportation hall. Shifeng nodded. Moreover, this teleportation hall is the same as the ones found in NPC cities. The only difference is that this thing can teleport people to only one designated NPC city. But even if it can teleport players to an NPC city, I'm afraid the teleportation fee isn't something ordinary players can afford, Yulan said after calming down. It was indeed a great convenience for a guild city to have a teleportation hall. That way, players seeking to travel to Silverwing City or NPC cities could do so within a short period. However, this convenience did not come for free. The cost of teleporting between countries was incredibly high, ranging from several dozen silver coins to several gold coins. This was the reason most players opted to travel by mount or by airship. If players were merely using Silverwing City as a teleportation hub, they wouldn't save themselves much trouble. As for teleporting from the Orc Empire to NPC cities, they could use return scrolls. What you say is correct, but this teleportation hall is linked to a somewhat special location, Shifeng said, smiling. He fully understood what was going through Yulan's mind. Isn't the destination an NPC city? Yulan asked, puzzled. Even if Silverwing City's teleportation hall were connected to an empire's capital, it wouldn't be of much help to the current Zero Wing. The target destination is indeed an NPC city, but this NPC city is somewhat different from others. Shifeng nodded. He then added slowly, you won't understand even if I explain it to you. The teleportation hall is already constructed. Contact Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor and have them send representatives to Silverwing City. Tell them I have a business proposition for them. Are we inviting them over now? Yulan asked in confusion. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The various superpowers were currently shrinking their spheres of influence, and none of them were having a good time. Even if Shifeng invited Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor for a discussion, the two guilds would most likely be incapable of solving Zero Wing's predicament. Yes, right now. I'm afraid this is something Zero Wing will have difficulty monopolizing, so we'll need some helpers, Shifeng said, nodding. Guild leader, what are we going to do? Yulan couldn't help asking out of curiosity. The Zero Wing of today was no longer the same as before. It already possessed incredible strength. Yet, Shifeng intended to ask two superpowers for help. This was undoubtedly going to be a huge operation. Moreover, he had even chosen such a precarious time to carry it out. Any mistake could easily lead to huge problems for the guild. Hearing Yulan's question, Shifeng chuckled and said casually, it's nothing. It's just an operation to turn Zero Wing into a true giant in God's domain. Chapter 2737, Wealthy Shifeng. Chapter 2737, Wealthy Shifeng. Silverwing City, Southern District. On a sparsely populated street, four players wearing black cloaks walked slowly into an alleyway. They would also occasionally observe their surroundings to guard against being followed. After the four of them walked a certain distance into the alleyway and verified that there were indeed no players following them, they breathed out a sigh of relief. What is this black flame trying to do? Why must we act so secretively and not let others notice us? A female guardian knight with shoulder-length hair demanded in dissatisfaction. Blue. Illusory words, the cleric in holy white robes, glared at the female knight standing beside her. I made an exception and brought you here this time. You'd best pay attention to your words and actions. Blue Gown was the vice commander and lead MT of the main force under Illusory Words' command. She ranked third among the guild's new talents and was also Illusory Words' confidant, who would succeed Illusory Words as vice guild leader in the future. Unfortunately, Blue Gown had a common failing, one that plagued all newcomers trained by superpowers. She did not place anyone outside of super first-rate guilds and super guilds in her eyes. After Illusory Words' scathing reprimand, the beautiful female knight dared not continue with her complaints. Big sis Illusory, I won't talk about this anymore, so you mustn't forget to bring me along for future matters, Blue Gown said pitifully. Pay attention next time, Illusory Words said as she gave Blue Gown a pampering look. She then turned to Unyielding Soul and Mu Lingshaw and said, I apologize for letting you see such a joke. It's normal for newcomers to be a little arrogant. You can't achieve anything if you don't have such arrogance. You don't have to mind us, Vice Guild Leader Illusory, Unyielding Heart said. He had long since gotten used to similar sights. In any other virtual reality game, being one of the top-ranking newcomers of a super first-rate guild was indeed something worth boasting about. After all, a single super first-rate guild or super guild was more than enough to rule an entire virtual reality game back then. How could the top talents of such guilds not be a little arrogant? Hence, it was only natural that these newcomers looked down on up-and-coming guilds. However, the situation was different now. At this point, God's Domain was practically a unique existence, already a game that even international corporations poked their hands into. The influence the various powers in God's Domain held was thousands of times greater than what they held in other virtual reality games. One couldn't use common sense to judge the powers operating within the game at all. Meanwhile, when Blue Gown heard Unyielding Heart's words, although she didn't say anything in response, her eyes held a hint of dissatisfaction. However, I wonder why Guild Leader Black Flame called both our guilds over this time? He even instructed us to keep our visit a secret, Mu Lingshaw said. The current Zero Wing was like the midday sun. Its current problems had a very easy solution: let major corporations invest in the guild. So long as Zero Wing possessed sufficient capital and background, maintaining its current sphere of influence would be a piece of cake. However, Shifeng did not do so. Instead, he had asked their two guilds over to discuss business. Mu Lingshaw couldn't help her puzzlement over Shifeng's solution to Zero Wing's current predicament. I can't even begin to guess Guild Leader Black Flame's thoughts, but based on his approach this time, I suspect this isn't going to be a simple matter, Illusory Words said, shaking her head. Shifeng had brought her too many surprises and miracles. Now, she wouldn't find it surprising if he created another miracle. After all, Zero Wing had even managed to help Frost Heaven secure the 6th reserve seat. We don't need to guess anymore. Pointing at tall walls some distance ahead, Unyielding Heart said, that should be the place Guild Leader Black Flame told us about. Let's just head inside and listen to why he called us over. When Illusory Words and the others saw the walls Unyielding Heart indicated, they were a little surprised. They never thought that the depths of this small alley would conceal such a massive structure. Although the walls were only around a dozen meters in height, the area they occupied was significant. The enclosure they formed could easily fit a football stadium. Based on the enclosure's size, the building inside should be at the advanced construction standard at the very minimum, yet nobody had discovered its existence, even now. When the group of 4 arrived before the steel gate in one of the tall walls, they were dumbfounded. 4 level 130+ fine gold guards manned the gate. There was even a level 133, Tier 3 dark gold ranked Great Mage protecting the gate in secret. The level of security was astonishing. At this stage of the game, if these 5 NPCs worked together, they could annihilate a 1,000-man team of Tier 3 players. Moreover, the various large guilds were treating fine gold and dark gold guards like precious treasures, showering them with all sorts of resources and ensuring their safety as much as possible. On the other hand, Zero Wing was actually using these precious guards as gatekeepers. This is private property. What business do you have here? A fine gold guard clad in grey leather armor asked in a hostile tone when he saw Unyielding Heart's group. We were invited by Guild Leader Black Flame. Unyielding Heart promptly took out the invitation he received from Zero Wing, which had Zero Wing's guild leader's seal to prove its authenticity. The magical mark is correct. The Tier 3 assassin clad in leather armor nodded. He then said, "Please follow me." Okay. Unyielding Heart's group then followed the Tier 3 assassin through the gate. Upon walking through the entrance, Unyielding Heart and the others gasped automatically. A teleportation hall? How is this possible? Aren't teleportation halls restricted to the national level? Blue Gown couldn't believe her eyes when she saw the 5-story-tall teleportation hall before her. She never thought Zero Wing could actually construct this sort of transportation tool in Silverwing City. B-Ra-B Furious Smiley B greater than NB or even now, teleportation arrays were incredibly rare items among the superpowers, what more a complete teleportation hall. Teleportation halls might be common in NPC cities, But for guild cities, they were priceless treasures that could skyrocket a guild city into prominence. The world of God's domain was massive. It took a long time for players to travel to level 100 plus maps even on flying mounts, and much longer for players without flying mounts. Many powers and adventurer teams would be willing to break the bank if it meant they could teleport directly to somewhere close to level 100 plus neutral maps. After all, time represented both money and opportunities for these people. Unlike ordinary players, they couldn't afford to progress at a leisurely pace. So, this is why we were required to come here quietly? How astonishing. Unyielding Heart smiled bitterly as he looked at the teleportation hall. This should be one of the privileges given to guilds officially recognized by the War God's Temple, Illusory Words said, a hint of envy in her eyes. With such a privilege, developing a guild city would be a piece of cake. Moreover, Silverwing City possessed an excellent environment and strategic location. That's right. This is indeed one of the privileges of an official guild. A voice suddenly entered the ears of Illusory Words and the others, answering the question in their hearts. Guild leader Black Flame, is this teleportation hall the important matter you wish to discuss? Unyielding Heart asked in slight confusion as he pointed at the teleportation hall. A teleportation hall was a godly development tool. So long as Zero Wing publicized the existence of its teleportation hall, combined with Silverwing City's defenses, Silverwing City would have no problem developing rapidly. Unyielding Soul and Crimson Empress participation wouldn't make a difference in the endeavor. In fact, their two guilds would want to ask Zero Wing for help instead. Yes, but that's not all of it. Shifeng nodded. He then smiled and said, "There's no point in telling you about it now. Follow me." After saying so, Shifeng promptly made his way inside the teleportation hall. After Unyielding Heart, Mu Lingshaw, Illusory Words, and Blue Gown exchanged looks, they followed him. The next moment after the four stepped onto the teleportation array inside the teleportation hall, they found themselves inside the Twin Towers Kingdom's Sky Spring City. At this time, however, Sky Spring City didn't have many players. Over 99% of the city's population consisted of NPCs. When these NPCs saw Unyielding Heart's group, they even began eyeing the group curiously as if they had just encountered some rare creatures. "Let's go. There are too many people here." After glancing at the NPCs observing them, Shifeng took out a Tier 3 group teleportation scroll from his bag and activated it. Before Unyielding Heart and the others could react, they were already over 10,000 yards outside of Sky Spring City. Afterward, Shifeng summoned the Thunder Eagle and ferried the group through the air for over half an hour. At the end of their journey, the group arrived at an ancient tower that pierced the clouds. The tower was easily over 1,000 meters tall. The Secret Covenant Tower? Illusory Words instantly recognized the ancient tower. Curious, she asked, "Why are we here?" She knew a little about the Twin Towers Kingdom's Secret Covenant Tower. The Secret Covenant Tower was an excellent leveling ground for players who had yet to reach level 100. And while there was an entrance fee of 1 magic crystal per person, so long as players didn't die, they could grind inside the tower for as long as they wanted. Initially, many large guilds had brought their new members here to increase their levels quickly. Only, after the introduction of several expansion packs, many more leveling spots became available. Since the monsters inside the Secret Covenant Tower didn't drop any good loot, the various powers had opted to power level their new members elsewhere. With mainstream players having long since exceeded level 100, the Secret Covenant Tower was now a thing of the past. "To grow stronger," Shifeng said, chuckling. "To grow stronger." Illusory Words was slightly surprised by Shifeng's words. "But we have long since passed level 100. The current Secret Covenant Tower's limit is no longer level 100, Shifeng said, shaking his head. Before the major update, the tower's open underground levels were only up to the 18th floor. Back then, the tower was, at best, suitable for players up to level 99. However, the tower's open underground levels are now up to the 36th floor, and the monsters inside reach up to level 150. Vice Guild Leader Illusory, I'm sure you understand what this means, right? When Shifeng finished speaking, the eyes of Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart lit up with excitement. Nowadays, Due to the large number of NPCs competing for quests and monsters, leveling up had become incredibly troublesome. Yet, levels were what players currently lacked the most. If, at the cost of one magic crystal per person, players could freely grind the crazed monsters inside the Secret Covenant Tower, their leveling speed would be much faster than what they could achieve in the outside world. Guild leader Blackflame, do you mean for us to cordon off the Secret Covenant Tower, monopolize it for ourselves, and let our guild members level up rapidly? Unyielding Heart asked, a hint of excitement in his voice. It had originally already been difficult for players to level up past level 100. With the additional competition from NPCs, the endeavor only became even more challenging. However, if Zero Wing, Unyielding Soul, and Crimson Emperor had a way to allow their members to reach level 120 rapidly and start challenging their Tier 4 promotion quests, their guild's development speed could surpass the other superpowers by a large margin. No, I don't mean to cordon off the Secret Covenant Tower. Shifeng shook his head. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU then? Unyielding Heart prompted, confused by Shifeng's answer. I want to thoroughly seal off Sky Spring City. Shifeng's eyes gleamed with a manic light at this proclamation. Aside from the members of our 3 guilds, we will prohibit all outsiders from setting foot in Sky Spring City. Cordon off the entire Sky Spring City? Unyielding Heart was stunned. Guild leader Blackflame, isn't that a little overboard? Illusory Words asked in confusion. While the Secret Covenant Tower can indeed provide faster leveling, the manpower required to thoroughly cordon off an NPC city is too much. With the current state of the game, it will be incredibly taxing for our 3 guilds to do so. Due to the NPC population boom, the various superpowers were short on manpower. Meanwhile, even if Sky Spring City was in decline, its player population still exceeded 100,000. The manpower required to chase away all these players from the city was no laughing matter. Not to mention, their 3 guilds would also have to station many players in the city long term. If we were doing this only for levels, it would indeed be a waste to cordon off the entire city, Shifeng said. He then walked to the Secret Covenant Tower, pointed at the second-floor teleportation array that led to the 19th underground floor, and looked at Illusory Words and the others. He then smiled and continued, but what if the Secret Covenant Tower contains complete legacies for the various Tier 3 classes? Chapter 2738, Tripartite Partnership. Chapter 2738, Tripartite Partnership. Complete legacies for the various Tier 3 classes? Illusory Words, Blue Gown, Unyielding Heart, and Mu Lingshaw couldn't help staring at Shifeng in shock and disbelief. This was especially true for Crimson Emperor's talented rookie, Blue Gown. She found Shifeng's words fantastic. In the current era of God's domain, the various kingdoms and empires already had a lockdown on Tier 3 legacies. They treated Tier 3 legacies as priceless treasures, and outsiders like players shouldn't even think of referring to these legacies. The only option players had for reaching Tier 3 was to search for the lost and fragmented Tier 3 legacies, hidden in level 100+ neutral maps. Yet, Shifeng was telling them that they could get their hands on complete Tier 3 legacies. How could she possibly believe this? Is what you say true, Guild Leader Blackflame? Illusory Words had to ask. If the Secret Covenant Tower were only good for providing players with a faster leveling speed, it wouldn't have too significant an impact on a superpower like Crimson Emperor. This was because tiers were everything in God's domain. Levels were only secondary. However, the various superpowers were currently already having trouble with the Tier 3 promotion quest, let alone the elusive Tier 4 promotion quest. In fact, the difficulty of the Tier 3 promotion was so high that the various superpowers were using the number of Tier 3 players they had as a comparison of strength. If what Shifeng said was true, and the Secret Covenant Tower contained complete Tier 3 legacies, then this was an incredibly astonishing matter. If news of this matter leaked out, it would most likely send the entire God's domain into an uproar. After all, despite many players having reached level 100 already, the players that had completed their Tier 3 promotions were still incredibly rare. If one could get a complete Tier 3 class legacy, then completing the promotion quest for the specified class would become significantly easier. This was why NPCs had a much easier time reaching Tier 3 than players. If the difficulty of players' Tier 3 promotion quests were reduced, the number of players successfully reaching Tier 3 would definitely skyrocket. You can personally verify this matter afterward, Shifeng said, chuckling. However, we must first decide whether we will cooperate or not. Unyielding Soul will do it, Unyielding Heart said without hesitation. Crimson Emperor naturally won't miss this opportunity, either, Illusory Words said, nodding. However, she then continued worriedly, but with only our 3 guilds, I'm afraid it will still be very difficult to seal off Sky Spring City, let alone concealing the Secret Covenant Tower's true secret. Cordoning off an NPC city was a challenging endeavor, as players could freely teleport into NPC cities. Players like themselves were powerless to prevent this. At most, they could keep players inside the city from leaving through the main gate and kill anyone that insisted on doing so. However, aside from the main gate, players had other means to exit an NPC city. One example would be a teleportation scroll like what Shifeng used. The second problem was the matter of the Secret Covenant Tower containing complete Tier 3 legacies. If Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor dispatched a lot of manpower to hunt for legacies, the superpower spies planted in their 2 guilds would very quickly find out about the secret. At that time, cordoning off Sky Spring City would become even more of a challenge. In fact, it might even become impossible. Tip: you can rest assured on this point. Since you agree to cooperate, what follows next is simple, Shifeng said, chuckling. He then took out a pale gold token and explained, this is Sky Spring City's guild token. Zero Wing has already garrisoned Sky Spring City and gained a portion of the city's management rights. A portion of the city's management rights? Illusory Words' eyes widened in shock as she looked at the guild token. NPCs managed the NPC cities of the various kingdoms and empires. Hence, any guild that successfully acquired even a small portion of an NPC city's management rights would have a solid hold over the city. Other guilds would have no way of wresting control over the city away from the ruling guild. In other words, Sky Spring City was already Zero Wing's possession. So, this is the privilege an official guild receives from garrisoning a city? Unyielding Heart looked at the token in Shifeng's hand with envy. He had to admit that this privilege was truly amazing. With this privilege, it was only a matter of time before Zero Wing surpassed its rival guilds. While a guild city indeed possessed excellent development potential, NPC cities still dominated the current god's domain. Travel between NPC cities was incredibly convenient. Moreover, NPC cities all had shops and auction houses that sold the essentials that the various powers and independent players couldn't do without. Thoroughly occupying an NPC city meant acquiring a gold mine with a steady income and no need to manage the city to obtain such significant income. This was something the various superpowers dreamed of having. That's right. This is a privilege for guilds officially recognized by the War God's Temple, Shifeng said, not bothering to hide the truth. With this token, I can enact a magic ban over Sky Spring City, preventing the use of any teleportation tools within it. This way, players can only walk if they wish to exit the city. In addition, for the sake of keeping the Secret Covenant Tower's Tier 3 legacies a secret, our 3 guilds should rely on only our main force members to hunt for the legacies. To begin with, it's pointless to have a large number of players hunt for them. Ordinary Tier 3 teams can't even survive on the lower floors, let alone search for the complete legacies. Of course, it's impossible to keep this secret forever. However, at this stage of the game, I wish to keep it hidden as long as possible. Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart nodded in agreement. They, too, felt that this was the only way they could go about doing things. So long as their guilds acquired complete Tier 3 legacies, they would already have a significant lead over the other superpowers. And the longer they could keep this secret hidden, the greater the benefits they could reap from it. Let's sign a contract, then, Shifeng said as he pulled out 2 guild contracts. Initially, Shifeng had wanted to invite the Secret Pavilion as well. However, the Secret Pavilion was a business-oriented guild and always held itself detached from the struggles between guilds. If the Secret Pavilion suddenly cordoned off an entire NPC city, it would create a huge commotion. In other words, It would seem quite abnormal. Hence, Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor were much more suitable for this partnership. After all, the two guilds were currently in a weakened position. Cordoning off an entire NPC city for the sake of acquiring more resources would be very normal for them. Even if the other superpowers found out that the two guilds' objective was the secret Covenant Tower, the superpowers would, at most, think that the tower provided players with faster leveling. As for permanently cordoning off Sky Spring City, Shifeng had never intended to do that. Zero Wing was in dire need of funds. Cordoning off Sky Spring City to allow the guild to gain some advantages might be fine in the short term, but sealing off the city forever would be unprofitable. Fortunately, although it would be impossible to earn money off other players and powers while Sky Spring City was cordoned off, the income from Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor would still be considerable. After all, both Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor had guild residences in Silverwing City. Compared to teleporting to Sky Spring City from the NPC cities of other kingdoms and empires, which would cost a minimum of 4 gold, it only cost a little over 1 gold per person to teleport from Silverwing City. Meanwhile, Zero Wing would get half of the profits generated by Silverwing City's teleportation hall. At that time, Zero Wing would earn a bunch in teleportation fees and entrance fees from Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor. After all, the two guilds would be sending a lot of players to the secret Covenant Tower to level up. This income would easily offset the loss Zero Wing suffered from barring NPCs from its guild cities. Nevertheless, raking in money from the two guilds wasn't a long-term plan, as both guilds had limited players and coins. Afterward, Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart signed a guild contract with Shifeng on behalf of their respective guilds. The terms of the contract were simple. Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor would help with cordoning off Sky Spring City from the outside. And aside from their main force members, the two guilds' other members were prohibited from visiting the secret Covenant Tower's 30th underground floor and beyond until the tower's secret had been discovered. Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor would also share the magic crystal cost of maintaining Sky Spring City's magic ban. This condition was incredibly disadvantageous for the two guilds. They were basically contributing both manpower and resources. However, Unyielding Heart and Illusory Words did not voice any opinions about this condition. After all, Shifeng had given their two guilds an opportunity to surpass the other superpowers. Moreover, Zero Wing could still partner with other superpowers. On the other hand, their two guilds had only Zero Wing. After the three signed a contract with each other, Illusory Words and the others promptly returned to their respective guilds to brief their guild executives. At the same time, they also began making the necessary preparations to cordon off Sky Spring City and send personnel into the secret Covenant Tower. This matter was of utmost importance to their two guilds, so they had no choice but to be incredibly careful in their actions. It would also take some time to fully cordon off Sky Spring City. Likewise, Shifeng had Fire Dance, Yulan, and the others prepare for the secret Covenant Tower. After seeing that there was nothing left for him to do, he chose to go offline to rest. Although staying logged into the game for more than 24 hours wouldn't cause him any harm, he still had to do his daily exercises. Zero Wing's headquarters, top floor lounge. By the time Shifeng returned to the real world, the sun outside was already illuminating the entire room. It was close to noon. Guild leader, you're finally out. Liang Jing suddenly contacted Shifeng. In a slightly joyful tone, she said, Miss Mushin has been waiting in the reception room for quite some time now. She says she's here to deliver all the things agreed upon previously. Moreover, she is also going to give Zero Wing a 300 million capital injection at no cost. 300 million credits. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. With this much money, Zero Wing could survive for quite some time even without selling coins for credits. She sure came quickly. Shifeng was startled by the speed. He had anticipated having to wait for a few days. After all, the remuneration Frost Heaven promised Zero Wing was significant. The 3 upper zone reserve slots aside, just the 50 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluid should take Frost Heaven quite some time to gather. Do you want to meet her now? Liang Jing asked. Of course. Shifeng nodded. Let me clean up first. I'll head over as soon as I'm done. Chapter 2739, Upper Zone. Chapter 2739, Upper Zone. Zero Wings Headquarters, Top Floor Lounge. After Shifeng finished tidying up, he made his way to the lounge. Upon entering the room, he noticed two girls sitting by the window and enjoying the scenery outside. Of the two girls, the elder one was Muxin, whom Shifeng had met quite a few times now. Muxin wore a purple cyan one-piece dress. Like the summer sun, she exuded an indescribable warmth. Her aura in the real world was quite unlike the solemn aura she had in God's domain. The younger girl, sitting beside Muxin, wore a white sweatshirt and a pair of jeans. Although the younger girl gave off a sense of purity and sassiness, her petite figure only made her look like a little girl pretending to be an adult. This younger girl was someone else Shifeng had met in God's domain before. She was Kurue, Muxin's younger sister. Shifeng, you finally decided to show up. Do you know how long you made us wait here? Kurue said, her face full of resentment as she looked at Shifeng. Don't listen to her. We didn't wait very long, Muxin said, shaking her head. My sister and I can also take advantage of this time to relax and appreciate the city scenery in the outside world. And from what I've seen thus far, I have to say that this is quite an enjoyable feeling. Muxin's words confused Shifeng a little. Appreciate the outside world's city scenery? Oh, right. I haven't told you about it yet. Noticing the confusion on Shifeng's face, Muxin smiled faintly and said, My sister and I have always lived in the upper zone, and we very rarely come out from there. I see. Shifeng nodded. However, Muxin's answer only served to confuse him further. Miss Muxin, is there no urban landscape inside the upper zone? All upper zones were established in first-tier megacities. Logically, urban landscapes should be very common in such cities. In fact, the scenery these megacities offered should be much more spectacular than what was visible from Zero Wings headquarters. You'll understand once you visit the upper zone, Muxin said, a friendly smile appearing on her face. The upper zone is different from other places. Although Uncle Hong has given you the reserve slots, you still need to register with the upper zone first before you can enter. However, you're probably unfamiliar with the upper zone, so Uncle Hong sent me to escort you so that you can avoid any unnecessary troubles. That's right. If you don't have the guidance of veterans like us, you'll face a lot of trouble once you enter the upper zone, Kurue said delightedly. You might even get kicked out of the upper zone because of a single mistake. Muxin did not refute Kurue's words. Looking at Muxin, Shifeng said, I'll have to trouble you, then. It's no trouble. Muxin shook her head. She then continued softly, It is only thanks to you that Frost Heaven has managed to become a reserve guild. After saying so, Muxin picked up the black briefcase beside her seat. There are 50 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluid here. You should store them well, Muxin said after opening the briefcase. She then warned, however, while the S-rank nutrient fluid is indeed an excellent product, it's best to avoid overusing it, as it is still incomplete. It isn't a finished product. Shifeng was surprised by this revelation. The S-rank nutrient fluid was something countless people fought to obtain. Just the fact that it could maintain a person's youth was already unbelievable. Yet, this drug wasn't actually a finished product. That's right. It isn't a finished product, so you should drink as little of it as possible, Kurue said, nodding. She then continued in a surprisingly soft voice, As you're about to enter the upper zone, there are some things you are allowed to know now. The S-rank nutrient fluid is only a defective product. However, as it indeed has amazing effects on the human body, the Green God Company sells it in small quantities. Nonetheless, in the upper zones, drinking it isn't recommended. Muxin nodded in support of Kurue's words. Thus far, Kurue and I have drunk only 2 or 3 bottles of S-rank nutrient fluids because of special circumstances. Uncle Hong even severely warned us and banned us from drinking more. Uncle Hong isn't someone who would harm us, so you should also be careful when using the S-rank nutrient fluid, Muxin said earnestly. Upon hearing this, Shifeng couldn't help becoming a little wary of the S-rank nutrient fluid. He then said, I understand. I'll have my people drink as little of it as possible. If even the upper zone advised its residents against drinking the S-rank nutrient fluid, then there were definitely problems with this product. However, as to what exactly these problems were, most likely, only a small number of people knew. Fortunately, aside from himself, everyone else in the guild hadn't consumed a significant amount of S-rank nutrient fluids. Now that our matters here are settled, since her elder sister had already transferred the S-rank nutrient fluids to Shifeng, Kurue said excitedly, "Let's go to the upper zone." "We're going there now." Shifeng was a little stunned. The upper zones were established only in certain first-tier cities, which were several hours of flight away. At this time, half the day had gone by already. "Of course. We have a supersonic jet ready," Kurue said nonchalantly. "If we miss today's opportunity, it'll be very troublesome to schedule another appointment." Kurue is right. Although Uncle Hong has given you the status required to enter the upper zone, entering it isn't easy. Since our matters here have been concluded, we should head over immediately, Mushin said in agreement. "Okay. I'll make some arrangements here and go with you afterward," Shifeng said without much hesitation. After all, he, too, wanted to visit the upper zone. Not to mention, Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose's situation wasn't exactly optimistic. If left alone for too long, they might even fall into a coma. Moreover, during his previous life, the upper zone was a place that even the executives of the various super first-rate guilds and first-rate guilds yearned to live in. As for the guild leader of a second-rate guild like himself, visiting the upper zone was something he never even dared to dream about. Mushin being willing to escort him to an upper zone was naturally to his advantage. After Shifeng passed on his guild affairs to Liangjing, he went to the airport with Mushin and Kurue. During their journey, Shifeng had to admit that the Boulder Corporation was indeed wealthy and influential. With the corporation's private supersonic jet, a trip that should have originally taken several hours on an ordinary airplane was completed in just 1 hour. At the end of the flight, the trio found themselves in Yuantian City, one of only 3 first-tier megacities within the country to house an upper zone. While crossing the city districts on a high-class maglev train, Shifeng couldn't help lamenting ruefully. As a megacity with a population of more than 100 million, Yuantian City far outstripped other cities in terms of prosperity. It was also one of the cities Shifeng had always wished to develop Zero Wing in, as it had many important resources rarely found in the outside world. In fact, almost all super first-rate guilds and super guilds operating in the virtual gaming industry had their headquarters in cities hosting an upper zone. This was because the upper zones would occasionally release some of its resources to the outside world. The various corporations based in the megacities hosting the upper zones would quickly divide these resources among themselves, and very rarely would any of these resources leave the city limits. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that only corporations that had set roots in an upper zone city could be considered a truly top-tier corporation. The road before Zero Wing was still very long. Meanwhile, after traveling inside the city for close to an hour and passing through many tunnels, Mushin parked the car in a vast area surrounded by steel walls. She then pointed at a huge door nearby and said, "We're here." After saying so, Mushin got out of the car and led Shifeng to the huge door. The upper zone is beyond this thing." Shifeng was amazed as he took in the 50-meter tall stone door and the energy walls that enveloped the space above the enclosure. In his previous life, he had only ever heard about the upper zone, and the information hadn't been much. Now that he was looking at one himself, he could only describe the upper zone as a titanic building made entirely of steel. "Let's go in," Kurue said to Shifeng. As she pointed at the passageway underneath the huge door and a line of several dozen people entering it, she beamed at him and continued, "However, you have to be careful once you enter. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Is there something special about it?" Shifeng asked, confused. "You'll understand once you go in," Kurue said, her smile growing even brighter when she saw the confusion on Shifeng's face. "However, you'd best be mentally prepared. Once you go inside, you won't have a chance to return to your own world." Afterward, Kurue stopped speaking and walked toward the passageway. Mushin had remained silent all the while. However, after a moment, Mushin took a deep breath and looked at Shifeng. She then said earnestly, "Although Kurue is right, there are unimaginable opportunities available in the upper zone. If you can prosper inside, Even the various international corporations will have to treat you with respect. Anyway, time is almost up. Let's enter, as well. Chapter 2740, Mental Path. Chapter 2740, Mental Path. Shifeng also deeply agreed with Mushin's reminder. In fact, he had a much better understanding than Mushin and Kurue did of how special and different the upper zone was, compared to the outside world. In his previous life, aside from the various powers of God's domain, any expert that successfully reached Tier 5 would, for some reason, yearn to enter the upper zone. Their yearning could even be described as fanaticism. That kind of fanaticism wasn't something Mushin and Kurue could understand. Back then, those people were truly willing to risk their lives to enter the upper zone. Extending one's lifespan by living in the upper zone was indeed a very tempting matter. In fact, it was something even the various major corporations would fight desperately to obtain. However, back then, Shifeng could tell that those Tier 5 experts weren't risking their lives just to extend their lifespans. Instead, it was as if something in the upper zone was attracting experts of such caliber. Thus, many Tier 5 experts and even Tier 6 God-ranked experts in God's domain had abruptly gone missing, their fate unknown. One of the most well-known people among those who disappeared was Violet Cloud. As a Tier 6 cleric god, Violet Cloud had been in existence even the various super guilds had a headache dealing with. In the past, in order to enter the upper zone, Violet Cloud had agreed to the harsh conditions of a super guild. After completing these conditions, she had entered the upper zone. However, she had also disappeared from God's domain from then on. Hence, whether it was Kurue's warning or Mushin's reminder, Shifeng still wished to take a look at what exactly the upper zone was. When Shifeng arrived before the entrance of the dark passageway, there were already several dozen people lined up there. These people were equally split between genders, and none of them looked to be over 20 years old, with the youngest one looking to be only 16 years old. Meanwhile, despite the arrival of beauties like Mushin and Kurue, these people practically ignored the two. Instead, they all focused on Shifeng, who was wearing casual sportswear. Another newcomer arrived. Judging by his appearance, he didn't come prepared at all. He's definitely another one of those despicable bastards that got in through connections. Sure, don't let him hear you. We can't afford to offend such people. When Shifeng overheard the conversation of the teenage boys and girls with his sharp senses, he was rather baffled. Meanwhile, Kurue, who stood beside Shifeng, nearly laughed at his situation but managed to restrain herself in the end. However, her lips still formed a shallow arc. You don't need to mind them, Mushin said to Shifeng as she glanced at the teenagers. They're here to participate in the assessment for entering the upper zone. Assessment for entering the upper zone? Shifeng was slightly surprised. This was his first time to hear of this. As far as he knew, the only reliable way for an outsider without connections to enter the upper zone was through recruitment by the Green God Company as a talent. Unlike what you would expect, the upper zone isn't limited to just people with authority, Mushin explained. The upper zone is also where the Green God Company nurtures its internal talents. These youngsters are all talents who have passed the Green God Company's preliminary tests. So long as they pass this assessment, they will also gain entry into the upper zone. However, this assessment is only available to talents under the age of 20. Talents past this age can only work outside. As for the assessment's content, it is simply to get through this passageway and enter the upper zone. Pass through this passageway? Shifeng asked in confusion as he pointed at the dark tunnel ahead. That's right. This passage is nicknamed the Mental Path, and it tests and tempers a person's mental strength. The mental path is normally closed, so it doesn't have any significant effect on people. However, when the mental path is activated, only 3 to 5 people get through it every year. Very few among those who participate in the Green God Company's test actually pass it, Mushin said, nodding. However, so long as one passes the test, not only will they receive priority training from the Green God Company, but they will also receive a significant reward. Kurue nodded in agreement with Mushin's words. She then said pridefully to Shifeng, I passed this mental path last year. Big Sis is even more of a genius, and she passed it at the age of 15. She caused quite a sensation in Yuantian City's upper zone back then. While Muxin was giving Shifeng an explanation, a young man walked out of the passageway. This man wore a tight-fitting t-shirt that thoroughly revealed his skeletal structure and muscles. His physique was elegant and full of power, like a cheetah's. However, despite his apparent youth, his aura suggested that he had experienced the vicissitudes of life. It was evident he wasn't as young as he looked. Upon noticing this man's arrival, the teenagers, Muxin and Kurue, promptly tensed up. "Huh? Another newcomer?" The young man was slightly surprised when his gaze fell on Shifeng. "Supervisor Luo, you misunderstand. He is here to register. He's not an examinee," Muxin explained. "Oh, so Hong Xinyuan gave his reserve slot to him?" Suddenly, a trace of disgust flashed in the young man's eyes as he took a second glance at Shifeng. What a lucky kid. However, the Green God Company is conducting an assessment today. If you want to enter, you'll have to go with these youngsters. I don't have the time to shut down the passageway again. Muxin frowned when she heard the young man's words. It was no secret that Luo Hanbing and Hong Xinyuan were rivals in the upper zone. However, she never thought that Luo Hanbing would use this opportunity to publicly retaliate against Hong Xinyuan. One needed to make an appointment to register with the upper zone. Normally, waiting several months for an appointment wouldn't be strange. This time, it was only thanks to Hong Xinyuan's connections that Shifeng could get registered so soon. However, if he didn't register today, he would have to wait for several months for another opportunity to do so. Meanwhile, those unregistered with the upper zone wouldn't be able to live there. Supervisor Luo, he is someone with a reserve slot. He has the right to freely enter the upper zone, Muxin said in a low tone to express her dissatisfaction. I never said I was stopping him from entering, Luo Hanbing sneered. He can enter whenever he wants. If he can't enter now, he can just enter tomorrow. As soon as Luo Hanbing finished speaking, the teenage examinees nearby nodded in agreement. That's right. The passageway is always open. Since he already has identification in the upper zone, can't he enter whenever he wants? Supervisor Luo is right. If he can't enter now, he can just enter tomorrow. Why must he compete with newcomers like us? The teenage newcomers instinctively despised people who entered the upper zone through connections. After all, they had gone through great difficulties to reach this point. They even had to walk through the activated mental path to secure identification in the upper zone. In comparison, Shifeng could obtain identification without having to do anything. He made their efforts look like a joke. Kurue also couldn't help glaring at the supervisor surnamed Luo. She then whispered to Muxin, saying, "Big sis, why don't we come back at another date? That bastard clearly won't let us in today." As one of the upper zone supervisors, Luo Hanbing wielded greater authority in the upper zone than Hong Xinyuan. Even if they reported this matter to their uncle, they wouldn't be able to do anything about this situation. After all, Luo Hanbing's actions were not completely unreasonable. "All right, if you don't want to enter, don't get in the way," Luo Hanbing said impatiently. "The newcomer assessment this time is very important. If it gets delayed, even Hong Xinyuan won't be able to bear the consequences." However, just as Muxin wanted to say something, a voice suddenly entered everyone's ears. "Supervisor Luo, so we can enter right away?" The owner of this voice was none other than Shifeng, who had remained silent all this time. Shifeng? Muxin stared at Shifeng in stupefaction. She never thought Shifeng would actually consider challenging the mental path. Let alone Muxin, even Luo Hanbing and the others were surprised. "Kid, it seems you're quite bold," Luo Hanbing said as he looked at Shifeng. Chuckling, he continued, "Go on in, then. However, let me give you a warning. You're not an examinee, so even if you lose consciousness inside, nobody will come to rescue you. If you stay inside for too long, it wouldn't be strange if you end up hospitalized for a few months. Don't mess around, Shifeng. The mental path has a limit. It's several times more difficult for those over the age of 20. This is why the Green God Company has set the assessment's age limit at below 20 years old," Muxin said hurriedly. Not many people knew this, But the Green God Company had previously allowed people over 20 years old but under 25 years old to participate in the assessment as well. However, not a single person from this age group had managed to pass the assessment. As a result, the company limited the assessment to only people under the age of 20. Meanwhile, Luo Hanbing also knew this point, which was why he was certain they wouldn't be able to enter the upper zone today. Relax. If it doesn't work out, I'll give up and come back immediately, Shifeng assured, chuckling. Tests of mental strength were considered fortuitous opportunities in God's domain. After all, the promotion quests for Tier 4 and above set an incredibly high requirement for players' mental strength. Meanwhile, after Shifeng's concentration had reached the Tier 4 standard, he had hit a bottleneck and failed to make further progress. With such an opportunity before him, he naturally had to give it a try. After saying so, Shifeng walked straight into the dark tunnel, leaving behind Mushin, who remained in a daze. All right, you newcomers head in, as well. Remember, you have only 1 hour. At Luo Hanbing's words, the newcomers promptly took deep breaths. Only after adjusting their mental state to its peak condition did they enter the passageway one after another. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Big Sis, what should we do? Kurue was also at a loss in this situation. She never thought Shifeng would be so courageous. Previously, when she told Shifeng to be careful when he entered the upper zone, she meant for him to be careful of the mental path. After all, even when inactive, the mental path significantly affected people older than 20. If he wasn't careful, he might end up fainting. Yet, now, Shifeng was walking straight into the fully activated mental path. The mental path is too dangerous for me, Mushin said anxiously. After giving the matter some thought, she said, you should go after him. If it looks like he can't hold on any longer, bring him back immediately. Ha! What a troublesome guy. Does he think he is still in God's domain? Kurue grumbled somewhat unhappily. However, in consideration of the overall situation, Kurue still entered the passageway. Chapter 2741, Steel Mind. Chapter 2741, Steel Mind. Inside the dark passageway, Shifeng walked for 5 minutes before he finally arrived at a brightly lit hall. The hall was the size of a basketball court and undecorated. The fluorescence from the walls brightly illuminated the entire hall. When walking into this hall, Shifeng felt as if he had just entered a white space. Is that the mental path they were talking about? Shifeng was slightly stunned when he saw the staircase leading downward at the other end of the hall. The reason for his surprise was the niggling feeling of familiarity this staircase gave him, yet he couldn't remember where he had seen it before. The staircase was made entirely of white, jade-like stones. It evoked a sense of sanctity and comfort that resembled the winter sun and the summer breeze. Moreover, this sensation grew increasingly stronger the closer he got to the staircase. He even had the urge to dash toward it. The moment Shifeng set foot on the white staircase, an indescribable comfort spread throughout his body. For a moment, he felt as if he had been reborn. However, immediately afterward, he felt as if someone had just smashed a hammer straight into his brain. His thoughts became paralyzed momentarily, and he felt as if his soul was about to leave his body. He even staggered as he briefly lost control over his body. So, this is the mental path. After backing up into the hall, Shifeng stared at the white staircase in disbelief. The strength of its mental assaults is even more frightening than Lightforged City's divine statues. No wonder the Green God Company set the age limit to below 20. If the divine will of Lightforged City's divine statues were equated to a storm that attacked one's whole body, then the white staircase's mental assault was a hammer that struck accurately and ruthlessly at the deepest part of one's brain. The penetrative power of the white staircase's mental assault was far above that of the divine will. During the time Shifeng was marveling at the staircase's mental assault, the Green God Company's newcomers had entered the hall one after another. That person is still here, as expected. Of course. Does he think the mental path is so easy to traverse? If it were that easy, there wouldn't only be 3 to 5 people gaining identification in the upper zone every year, but thousands instead. I wonder how far I can get this time. When the newcomers saw Shifeng standing idly before the mental path, they didn't find his reaction surprising at all. When they first set foot on the white staircase, they, too, had been shocked by its power. Moreover, the staircase's mental assault truly hurt. It hurt so badly that they couldn't even scream. If possible, they wouldn't want to experience such a feeling a second time. However, someone among the new arrivals this time might actually make it through, a 19-year-old girl in white clothes said. Looking at the white staircase, she sighed ruefully and continued, "In comparison, this is my last chance. If I don't get through this time, I can only mingle in the city." "You're talking about that special enrollment, right?" a long-haired girl of similar age said as she looked at a 17-year-old boy with short hair nearby. "How frustrating. The company recruited him just a few months ago, yet he can already participate in the assessment. The company's executives have a high opinion of him. It really makes you wonder if his head is made of stone. He actually shows no reaction to the mental assaults." "Who else?" the white-shirted girl retorted. When she looked at the skinny, short-haired boy, indescribable envy filled her eyes. "If I had half his talent, I might be able to pass the assessment this time. People like him are bound to become internal members of the company. His looks are fine too." Licking her lips, the long-haired girl said, "I heard he still doesn't have a girlfriend. If we seize this opportunity, we might have a chance to enter the upper zone as well." As the two girls whispered to each other, the skinny boy, the boy in question, stepped onto the white staircase. The next moment, the boy descended the staircase one step after another at a uniform speed. From beginning to end, he showed no response to the staircase's mental assaults. It was as if the mental assaults didn't even exist. The boy's calm performance immediately took the breaths of the newcomers inside the hall. "No way. He really isn't reacting at all. Is his brain made of metal?" When the lanky youth remained unfazed even after descending over 100 meters, both the newcomers in the hall and Shifeng couldn't help their surprise. With such a performance, his concentration standard should be at Tier 4 already. Shifeng already had a clear grasp of the white staircase's mental assaults. If the mental assault he suffered were several times weaker, it would roughly match the divine statue's mental assault. However, the short-haired boy actually remained unfazed by such a mental assault. This showed that the mental assault's intensity was well within the limit of the boy's mental fortitude. Even Violet Cloud did not possess such frightening mental fortitude. Hee. Shocked, right? Karue, who had just arrived in the hall, giggled as she looked at the short-haired youths departing back. "I already told you to be careful. This mental path isn't as simple as you think it is. As for that boy you saw, his Yang Wuming, a peerless talent the Green God Company went to great lengths to discover. The company considers him the best talent of the past few decades. Even my elder sister is far behind him." "Yang Wuming?" Shifeng suddenly recalled something. "He is that Yang Wuming?" "That's right. His Yang Wuming. What's the matter?" Karue was confused as she looked at Shifeng's surprised expression. "I see. So that's why his concentration standard is so high." Shifeng chuckled. Everyone in God's domain had known Yang Wuming's nickname in the past. Invincible Swallow. He was a master among magical classes, and he could cast spells as easily as speaking. He was an overlord of magic, and he had fought countless PvP battles without suffering defeat during his career in God's domain. Even the old monsters of the various super guilds couldn't last more than 3 exchanges against him. When Invincible Swallow was at his peak, only Tier 6 God-ranked experts, who were 1 tier above him, stood a chance against him. Only, the number of Tier 6 God-ranked experts in the game at that time could still be counted on the fingers of one hand. Moreover, all of them were incredibly elusive, and finding even one was a challenging task, let alone dueling one. Meanwhile, after Invincible Swallow reached Tier 6, he suddenly disappeared without a trace. Nobody knew the reason for his disappearance, either. Invincible Swallow's disappearance had caused a great commotion back then. Rumor had it that even the Green God Company had frantically searched for him. However, he remained missing. This is interesting. Shifeng never thought that he would actually meet the legendary Invincible Swallow here today. "You're not thinking of challenging the mental path, are you?" Kurue was stunned when she saw Shifeng's mood suddenly brightening. She had a strong suspicion that the mental path had driven Shifeng crazy. Challenge? Shifeng shook his head. I don't plan on challenging it. I just plan to take a look inside the upper zone. Is there a difference? Kurue was a little puzzled. If Shifeng didn't cross the mental path today, he shouldn't even think of entering the upper zone. Of course, there is. Taking a deep breath, Shifeng said, it means I don't intend to bear the mental assaults anymore. Kurue grew even more confused. Were mental assaults something one could avoid confronting just because one wished it? However, Shifeng did not make any additional explanations. He immediately stepped onto the white staircase. Previously, he had used a trick to absorb the divine will of the divine statues to improve his concentration. This time, he also planned to use a similar trick. Only, the white staircase's mental assault had also given him some new ideas. And that was how to enhance his mental control. Since the white staircase's mental assaults possessed great penetrative power, he would gather all his focus into a single point instead of elevating his control over his whole body. He would turn his mind into steel and defend only the deepest part of his brain. The next moment, Shifeng took his first step on the white staircase and paused. However, unlike before, his expression did not change at all. There was no dissonance in his body, either. He simply stood there quietly. Success. Shifeng's eyes widened in delight. However, this state also deprives me of all control over my body. It seems that I still have to retain a small part of my focus to control my body and concentrate the rest on shielding my mind from these mental assaults. Afterward, Shifeng took another step forward. Clang. A faint jangle echoed in Shifeng's mind. However, not only did the hammer-like mental assault fail to shake the depths of his mind, but his body didn't even twitch in the slightest. It works, but adapting to this state isn't going to be easy. Shifeng couldn't help smiling bitterly at the heaviness of his body. This was his first time using only a small amount of mental power to control his body. Right now, he felt as if he was hovering between consciousness and unconsciousness. His body also felt incredibly ponderous. However, after taking several steps, Shifeng began to have a better grasp of this state. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Meanwhile, from an outsider's perspective, Shifeng looked as if he was descending an ordinary staircase. He showed no reaction whatsoever to the white staircase's mental assaults. Moreover, his speed of descent was even increasing as time passed. In less than a minute, Shifeng overtook Yang Wuming. The distance between the two even kept growing afterward. How is this possible? Kurue's eyes nearly fell out of their sockets when she saw Shifeng practically flying down the staircase. Is he immune to the mental assaults, similar to how Yang Wuming is? As for the other newcomers in the hall, they were even more dumbfounded by this situation. None of them dared believe their eyes. In the end, Shifeng spent less than 15 minutes traversing the mental path. When he reached the goal, melodious bells rang and echoed throughout the upper zone. Chapter 2742, Grade 1 Authority. Chapter 2742, Grade 1 Authority. Upper Zone. Outside the mental path, upon hearing the peal of melodious bells, both Luo Hanbing and Mushin revealed surprised looks on their faces. It's been less than 20 minutes since they went inside, yet someone's already passed the assessment. Mushin's surprise at the sound of the bell was inevitable. The mental path was an incredibly important aspect of the upper zone. Whenever someone successfully passed the activated mental path, bells would be rung to notify everyone in the upper zone of the achievement. The mental path's bell's peal proved that someone had cleared it already. However, the speed at which they cleared it was simply unbelievable. Usually, it would take a person over 30 minutes to traverse the mental path. After all, the staircase's length wasn't exactly short. Even a person walking at a normal pace would take 30 minutes to descend it. Not to mention, every step a person took on the mental path would trigger an intense mental assault. Good. A clear time of less than 20 minutes. It seems the higher-ups were right about that kid. He really is a monster. Luo Hanbing grinned in satisfaction. The price I paid to become the guide for this assessment was truly worth it. As the invigilator for the assessment, the more excellent the newcomers that appeared under his watch, the higher his evaluation with the higher-ups. Moreover, as the guide for the assessment qualifiers, he would have a much easier time recruiting the qualified newcomers. If he could rope a peerless genius like Yang Wuming to his side, his status in Yuantian City's upper zone would also rise. Meanwhile, Mu Xin, who similarly realized this matter, revealed an ugly expression on her face. If Luo Hanbing enlisted a mental monster like Yang Wuming to his side, his status in the upper zone would most likely surpass Hong Xinyuan's. After a few more minutes went by, the mental path spells rang once more. Another person passed. Mu Xin was stunned when she heard the bells. Simultaneously, her complexion darkened even further. The bells of Yuantian City's upper zone rang only a handful of times each year. Yet, the bells had rung twice today. This was a situation that didn't occur even once in a decade. Yet, Luo Hanbing had actually chanced upon this day. Ha ha ha. Amazing. The newcomers this time are truly amazing. Luo Hanbing burst into laughter. He then glanced at Mu Xin and said, Mu Xin, you're one of the famous geniuses in Yuantian City's upper zone. You won't have a future if you keep following old Hong. How about you join me? You might even raise your mental strength by a rank in the next 1 or 2 years if you join me. At that time, your authority in the upper zone will also be elevated to grade 1. Thank you for your offer, Supervisor Luo, but I'm doing very well following Uncle Hong. I believe it won't be long before I raise my authority to grade 1. Mu Xin rejected Luo Hanbing's offer without hesitation. Luo Hanbing was not at all surprised by Mu Xin's refusal. He said nonchalantly, once behind, always behind. I hope you don't regret your decision today. What the upper zone prioritized the most was a person's mental strength. In fact, mental strength determined a person's status in the upper zone. The stronger one's mental strength, the greater the authority one would enjoy in the upper zone, hence the more the resources one could obtain. However, developing one's mental state was incredibly difficult. Moreover, the older one became, the slower one's growth would be. Take Mu Xin, for example. She had cleared the mental path at the age of 15. Back then, she was judged to possess advanced mental strength. However, as she wasn't an internal member of the Green God Company, she was only granted Grade 2 authority, which was 1 level lower than that of internal members with the same mental strength standard. Back then, the other individuals unaffiliated with the Green God Company who had passed the mental path had been granted only Grade 3 authority. Unfortunately, even after so many years, Mu Xin's mental strength had not improved by much. As a result, she remained at Grade 2 authority even today. However, if Mu Xin could improve herself and reach Grade 1 authority, her status in the upper zone would undergo a qualitative transformation. Fewer than 200 people held Grade 1 authority in Yuantian City's upper zone. Even Luo Hanbing, a supervisor in the upper zone, only held advanced rank authority, 1 rank higher than Grade 1 authority. After that exchange, Luo Hanbing stopped speaking to Mu Xin. In Luo Hanbing's opinion, Mu Xin was basically deadwood. With Hong Xinyuan's meager resources, let alone raising Mu Xin's mental strength standard, even helping Kurue, Mu Xin's little sister, to the Grade 2 standard would be challenging. Following which, time passed quickly. Why haven't they returned yet? Did something happen to Kurue? Mu Xin looked at the time nervously. While Kurue wasn't immune to the mental path's effects, with her past experiences, she shouldn't have any problem dealing with the mental assaults anymore. The pain inflicted by the mental assaults should be well within her range of tolerance. It's been almost an hour now, yet they still haven't come out. They must have met with an accident, Luo Hanbing said as he glanced at his watch. Sneering, he continued, I warned him that he'd get hospitalized if he wasn't careful. Youngsters nowadays really don't know how to listen to advice. It's a pity, but they'll have to stay in there for a few hours. Did something really happen? Mu Xin's complexion turned pallid. The mental path's activation and deactivation processes were very tedious. Even someone with special privileges would need 2 or 3 hours to power it down. If Shifeng and Kurue collapsed and remained in the mental path for such a long period, they would be fortunate to get away with just 1 month of hospitalization. If their condition was serious, they might end up with their future progress cut short. Just when a wave of panic overwhelmed Mushin, the quantum watch on her wrist suddenly rang, notifying her of a call. Meanwhile, the caller was none other than Karue. Karue, what's the situation on your side? Mushin couldn't help getting angry when she saw Karue's face on the screen. Why haven't you come out yet? Sis. That's not important anymore. A major event happened on the mental path, Karue said excitedly. A major event? What is it? Are you talking about the two that passed the mental path? Mushin couldn't help feeling frustrated at Karue's words. She couldn't believe her little sister was in the mood to care about incidental matters in this situation. Yes, Shifeng actually passed the mental path, Karue said, her eyes filled with excitement. Everyone in the hall got a shock. Afterward, I had to hurry through to get to the communication area. I'm dead tired after that trip. Shifeng, passed the mental path? Mushin suddenly felt that her brain was somewhat lacking in processing power. Shifeng was undoubtedly over 20. Meanwhile, in the history of Yuantian City's upper zone, no one past the age of 20 and under the age of 25 had ever managed to conquer the mental path. Emitim. I knew you wouldn't believe me. Here, take a look for yourself. He's here with me, Karue said as she adjusted the camera angle to capture Shifeng, as well as Yang Wuming, who was glaring at Shifeng with eyes brimming with fighting spirit. Bye-bye. We're going to enter the upper zone now. After Karue finished speaking, she promptly disconnected the call, leaving her elder sister in a daze. Impossible. Luo Hanbing was dumbfounded when he overheard Mushin and Karue's conversation. That kid is already over 20, how can he possibly get through the mental path? No sooner had Luo Hanbing thought this than a notice popped up on his quantum watch. The next moment, his quantum watch projected a holographic table containing the data of the mental path's qualifiers this time. First, Shifeng clear time, 13 minutes 41 seconds age, under 25 years old affiliation, non-member mental strength appraisal, special grade upper zone authority, grade 1 second, Yang Wuming clear time, 18 minutes 33 seconds age, under 20 years old affiliation, internal member mental strength appraisal, advanced grade upper zone authority, grade 1 special grade? Mushin was dumbfounded when she saw the tabulated data. Although Shifeng's performance in God's domain was indeed astonishing, she never imagined his mental strength would be equally astonishing special grade. This was a mental strength she was striving to attain. However, no matter how much effort she put in, she remained far from reaching this standard. At some point, she had even begun losing hope of further progress. Damn it! How could this be? Luo Hanbing's face turned ashen when he saw the results. He had inadvertently offended a monster. Moreover, Shifeng evidently had deep ties with Hong Xinyuan. Meanwhile, inside the mental path's innermost section, Shifeng and the others were riding a platform descending deep into the ground. The gravity here is getting stronger. Shifeng discovered that as he got deeper into the tunnel, the gravity his body experienced intensified. In less than 10 minutes riding the platform, the gravity he experienced had already doubled. After the moving platform exited the tunnel, Shifeng was immediately dumbfounded. However, his surprise wasn't just because the gravity here was 3 times stronger than that of the outside world. Instead, it was because there was actually a levitating mountain beyond the tunnel. This mountain's radius exceeded 10 kilometers, and there were several levitating escalators leading up to this mountain. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Many tall buildings stood on this levitating mountain. Clouds and mist shrouded its peak, preventing anyone from catching a clear glimpse of it. Overall, the mountain looked like a paradise on Earth. Well, stunned, right? The shocked expression on Shifeng's face delighted Karue. Anyone visiting the upper zone for the first time would never think that the upper zone would be underground, much less there being such an unimaginably huge space deep underground. Indeed, it is incredible, Shifeng admitted. He had never heard of or seen such a unique space before. It was no wonder those who knew of the upper zone specifics would be so desperate to live here. Just breathing the air here gave him a refreshing feeling. If he could reside here long term, achieving longevity indeed wouldn't be a dream. When Kurue saw that the moving platform had stopped at the foot of the mountain, she promptly opened the platform's gate and stepped off the platform. However, when she saw that Shifeng remained standing idly on the platform, she urged him excitedly, "Quick! You have grade 1 authority now. Let's go to the registration office and take a look. There might be some good rewards waiting for you." You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.